Carl Wilkens is my new best friend. Actually, we've been trying to do this for about a year. In 1994, many of you may remember, some of you are not because you weren't born yet, but that's okay. Um, Rwanda experienced one of the most incredible tragedies of modern time, of where they had two of their people, the Tutsi and the Hutu, basically have civil war, and there was a genocide, and the world watched. And Carl Wilkens was at the time, you were a missionary with the Adventist Church, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. And he was the only American that stayed behind. And so that's kind of his background. And he has been going back to Rwanda all these years, taking students, taking teachers, talking through what happened. And here we are on this topic that we've been walking through our series, Dumb Things Smart Christians Believe, that forgetting or forgiving means forgetting. And so immediately I thought of you, Carl, and I thought, man, your story and you immediately can speak to this. So I'm gonna shut up so that you can have a ton of time. I am gonna put this up on the screen. Carl enjoys dialogue. So if you have a smartphone, tablet, carrier pigeon, something like that, you can go to polev.com/westernhill098 and you can put in a question. And here in a few minutes, we'll look at some of those questions and have a little bit of a dialogue back and forth with Carl. In the meantime, Carl, it is all you, my friend.
Well, thanks. Thanks so much, Grant. Nice to be with you all this evening. I'm here from snowy Washington State. Are my pictures and does everything look like it's running good on your end, sir? I see a thumbs up. All right. And if you had a chance to make one of my windows larger than a little thumbnail and I could see the audience, that would be wonderful, but I'll work with a tiny one too. I'm just happy it's working. I was out this morning for a run with this little crazy guy in the snow, and he took off like a light. There was a coyote in the field. Now he survived 2 coyote attacks, and when the coyote saw him coming, coyote just leisurely started loping off like, come on, buddy, I'll introduce you to my friend. So I'm running pell-mell down the field, and he can't stop or listen when he's more than 10 feet away from you. And so finally he doubled back on the scented trail, and I caught up and grabbed him and settled him down. I thought, put him down. Off he went again after a deer. I'm running up the field now. And wouldn't you know it, this massive eagle comes flying through the air. And I mean, I felt like I was on some sort of weird movie set. And I'm shouting at this eagle and stuff because I think that Sammy is too big. But I don't know if that. Anyway, I finally grabbed them, and the eagle actually veered off to the side. And that's just life here in the snowy Northwest. It was a good beginning to the day. And I've been thinking, of course, a lot about our time together here and about this idea of forgiveness. And I just a couple of texts that sort of set the stage. They're ones that I'm sure are familiar with many of you, just really good old common sense that we need right now. I mean, we always need it, but right now in America, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ, God forgave you. And another good one in Matthew, Peter, how many times? And I often, have thought as I look at this, it's like, well, how many times do I want to be set free? How many times do I want to be liberated from the prison of bitterness and anger? The last one, I love it from Psalms. You, Lord, are forgiving and good, abounding in love to all who call to you. Think about the billions of people on the planet, abounding in love to all who call to you, from a Syrian refugee camp, from a homeless shelter in New York City where mom is trying to do remote learning with her first grader, from somewhere there in Kansas City. You, Lord, are forgiving and good, abounding in love to all who call to you. So I had a little bit of a challenge to figure out which story I would share with you this evening. I love the story of Maria and Filbert. Sorry, I'm kind of blocking Filbert there. But since I made a little video for a group in Greece about this story, I thought, oh wait, I forgot to say, I don't know if are you all big ameners? I mean, shucks, I saw you standing up and raising your hands. I've got an idea for you about a virtual amen. Is that if you see something that would you be like amen or something like that, you can hold up your phone. Oh, that's so much nicer. Thank you. Now I didn't disappear, did I? We're all good? Thumbs up. I'm counting on you two there on the front row. Sir with the glasses, lady with the Bible in your hand. Yeah, them. Okay, good. I'm counting on you guys to like give me a thumbs up or down, okay? So when things are, yeah, good. I can still see you well. I hope you can see me. So here's the idea. The idea is that, taking notes in church, that's a great idea. Or with your phone, you could just take a picture. I have two things here. This is a 20-minute video about a family in Rwanda, the reconciliation between two families in Rwanda. So I'm not telling you that story tonight, but I'm telling you where you can find it. If you just search Rwanda Reconciliation, the Art of Reframing on YouTube. The other thing that I'm not doing with you this evening is I'm not going into depth of 1994. So once again, if I kind of do an okay job of introducing you to Rwanda this evening, and you want to go deeper, again on YouTube, you can just search I'm Not Leaving Full Movie. And that's a 40-minute one. So that's a little more of a commitment, but you'll get an idea of what would happen there through the lens of our family. The story that I do want to get into with you this evening, though, is going to begin in 2016. At least we're jumping into the story 4 years ago, 2016. You can see, hopefully, this group of high school young people who are standing here in front of, try to get it there, in front of 200 men and women who have confessed to their different roles in the genocide. Some of them killing, some of them torturing, some of them raping, some of them giving away the hiding place and betraying people. So it's through the lens of these high school kids that I'd like you to kind of look at the story this evening. From this Reinvent Yourself camp, that's what I call this, is once they confess, they could go work in the community to reinvent themselves, not pay back, but that's in the 20-minute video. So I'm not going to get too distracted there. We're going to head over here in 2016 to the oldest prison in Kigali. And we're going to go inside and have a seat in the warden's office. And he will bring in 5 prisoners, 4 of whom were involved in the genocide. There's 3,000 prisoners in the whole prison, and about 1,000 of them there in the prison back in 2016. This prison actually has been closed since then, and they built a new one, but everything's always changing in Rwanda. But we're going to speak to these 5 prisoners, 4 of whom who committed genocide. As they introduce themselves and they say their name, one prisoner is going to just like snap my neck up. I mean, I may have been looking down or, and like whiplash when I hear this man's name and I hear where he comes from. His name was Gregoire, and he came from Nyakubanda, which probably doesn't mean anything to any of you, but that was one of the neighborhoods of the capital city where the largest orphanage was that I was helping, along with my Rwandan friends. Now, like I said, I'm not going to go into depth in 1990 when we moved there with our young family. I'm just going to give you just a little bit of context. It's, of course, so different. Everything's changed. None of this stuff was there, 26 years ago. It's an amazing city today. But we were there building schools and operating clinics. 4 years after we arrived is when the genocide started. And you heard just a little bit, some of these terms. Here's an ID card. The largest group were called Hutu, and in the ID card, it's crossed out. The minority group, Tutsi, and a really tiny group, Twa, and that says nationalized next to it. But unfortunately, there's going to be a civil war that started 6 months after we arrived in 1990, ended in 93. We were super excited about peace. but there was a small group of men and women who were planning the genocide. And while I'm not going to get into the history, I just want to make it really clear to you this evening that this is not about one group of people who hated another group. Okay, the Hutu and Tutsi loved each other more than they married each other all the time in church together and everything else. This tragic story is a story of political manipulation of the basic needs of ordinary people. And an old piece of I don't know if you can call that artwork, but an old slide that I made probably 16 years ago when I started traveling to schools and talking about Rwanda, is this idea that genocide stems from thinking that says my world would be better without you in it. I always pause when I read that because I see shadows and bright pictures of thinking all over the world when I think of that, thinking here in our country. The idea that we'll make something better by getting rid of somebody is just, I'm afraid it's like, I wouldn't want to say we're wired like that. I'd rather say, made in the image of God, we are not wired like that, but a drastic short circuiting happens. This genocide will be organized by just a small group of people. It'll be launched on Wednesday following Easter Sunday. On April 6, 1994, April 6, 5432 was, did I get that right? 2 or 3 was Easter Sunday. And I can pretty much promise you that the majority of the men and women who planned the genocide were in church that Easter Sunday in Rwanda. The other little piece I'll tell you about it is the genocide will be ended by refugees who had fled the country in independence about 30 years earlier and finally were not allowed back for so long. They organized militarily. They came back by force, thus the 3-year war I mentioned to you from 90 to 93. They're called the Rwandan Patriotic Front. These soldiers are the ones who laid down their guns with the government soldiers when we thought we were going to have peace before this group of men and women launched the genocide. They then picked up their guns and they will be the ones who will 3 months later end the genocide, but not before. Not before more than 1 million people will be killed, mostly by their neighbors. So when, Grant, you talked about forgiveness, Rwanda is a country that is just, would not, there would be no peace, there would be no development, there would be no life were it not for forgiveness. And there's so much that we could talk about with forgiveness this evening, but I'm going to narrow it down to this story. Look, finishing this part in 94, the killing starts, and the American government, along with all other around the world, they will want to evacuate their citizens, and they will tell us. My mom and dad were actually visiting at the time, so yeah, that adds another interesting dynamic. But they will tell us, we got to leave you out of the country, and everybody, bring your mom and dad, bring everybody. Oh wait, don't bring Rwandans. We're going to drive out. We'll go through roadblocks. If we have Rwandans in the vehicle, it'll escalate the situation. It'll increase the risk of violence. You can't bring any Rwandans. So the short version of why Teresa and I decided to stay is we had a young lady and a young man in our home when the plane was shot down. He was there as the watchman. Sorry, the plane shot down. I make these assumptions. That was the event when the president was killed that triggered it. The planners used that event to launch the genocide. This young lady had been living with us for 3 years, loving on our kids. Teresa and I thought, maybe, these people treat us like royalty. Rwandans treat foreigners like, the most valued guest. Maybe we can use that privilege to help these two people. So my mom and dad, Teresa, will leave with the kids, and I will stay. And in a nutshell, I'll be working with 2 Rwandan colleagues, both men who had Hutu ID cards so they could get through the roadblocks, both men who also had Tutsi wives. and we'll start bringing water to groups of orphans around the city. So a lot more of that story in the little film that I mentioned to you. I did form a relationship with the colonel in charge of the city, who is actually now is in prison for all of his role in the genocide. But that relationship was key. Finding an ally among the enemy, an incredible concept to me. But let's move forward here. So I'm looking at my clock. He gives me a travel permit, and I form this relationship with the man who's basically in charge of genocide in the capital city. And he is, I guess, putting on this front of humanity. Yeah, you can help. We've got orphans who need help. And so partnering with him, partnering with my Rwandan colleagues, we'll be bringing food and water to 3 orphanages, the largest one being in Nyamirambo, run by my good friend Damas. We were both, I think I was 36. I was 36. I think Damas was about 34 at the time. He had more than 400 kids at his little orphanage, and they were starving and they were thirsting. Literally, they were dying of diarrhea and dysentery. So the fellow we met in prison that I'm going to come back to in a moment, one day we showed up with water at the orphanage, and he and his gang surrounded us at the orphanage. Let's see if this is loud enough to actually.
Well, you're coming today as an answer to prayer. They were here yesterday, and the last day or two, they had killed about 6 people at the orphanage, and they had just given the message the day before that they would come back the next day and kill everybody. They said, we don't care Hutu or Tutsi, everybody here needs to get out or get killed. He's not even finished telling me the story, and all of a sudden, around us, we start to see them materialize. Some start to come in the main gate, others are coming through the hedges.
So Interahamwe was crossing around that orphanage. Time we see Carl Wilkens is starting talking to each other. What's that Muslim doing here?
This was the beginning of what became between 2 and honestly I can't remember 2-3 hour standoff. The militia just didn't move. They kind of positioned themselves all around the orphanage, but as long as I was there, they seemed not to be coming in.
Kids was inside, they was afraid, they was crying, there was many people inside, the mothers and the fathers who hiding there.
I saw their leader drive by once. I saw him walk by another time. I said to Gasikwa, siphon the water out of the barrels into the reservoir as slow as you can. We got to make this process drag on as long as we can. But eventually Gasikwa was finished.
And the Interahamwe was still there. That's wanted to move there, waiting for Carl Wilkens to go. And the Carl Wilkens also that's wanted to go.
You know, as I listened to my friend Gasikwa tell the story, and he's got a little chuckle. For me, for so many years, this story gave me wicked knots in my stomach and everything. But I realized years later, as he was telling the story, Gasikwa had let go of a lot of things that I don't think I had let go of. So if you come back with me, oh, by the way, that massacre will be stopped. We'll actually end up asking the they killed the prime minister at the beginning, the bogus prime minister, the one who took over the coup. We'll ask him to stop the massacre and he'll stop it. But again, that's another story. Now we're back 2016, we're back at prison, hey, with the students and with this man Gregoire, the leader of that killing squad that we just saw who surrounded the orphanage and intended to kill everybody. That day he was stopped, but other days he wasn't. They reckon that he and his gang probably killed more than 2,000 people, which to me is just unfathomable. I'm not sure how to communicate to you what I was feeling as I was sitting in the office there, and I'm looking across the room at this man. The students finish asking their questions. The warden says, well, I guess if we're done, I'm gonna go. No, wait, I said, because I wasn't sure that this was really the guy. And I don't know why, but I felt like I needed to know for sure if this was the guy. And maybe to help you understand too a little more the difficulty that I was struggling with was also those little kids who were terrified in the orphanage. One of those little kids I had become friends with, Johnson, he just married and has a beautiful little boy last April. Johnson was a 9-year-old and watched Gregoire and his gang kill Johnson's mother and his aunt, about 30 people in their neighborhood that particular morning. And then Johnson fled to the orphanage. So there were a lot of these thoughts going through my mind as I'm looking across the room at this man, this mass murderer. And for some reason, I feel like I just got to know, is he really the guy? And because I'm not recognizing him after 22 years. And I ask him several more questions. Initially, he speaks to me in French, and then he stops and he just starts looking at the floor. And the rest of the questions are through a translator. And finally, I'll say, what kind of car did you drive? And he'll say a green Mercedes station wagon. And that cinches it. There was only one of those around the city. I knew this was the guy. Now what am I going to do? And, I say to him, do you recognize me? He's been looking at the floor, hey, but he looks up. And then he says to the lady who's standing behind him, very respectfully, compassionately, she works there for the prison system. She's got her hands on his shoulder like he's her uncle or something, which is not, but it's Rwandan culture. And he says to her in Kinyarwanda, well, there was a Catholic priest bringing water to the kids. I guess they thought I was a Catholic priest, and from Canada. Anyway, whatever the case, I said, yeah, that was me. And it was a very awkward moment. I mean, wouldn't that have been a great time for some sort of forgiveness? Farthest thing from my mind. Just a bunch of anger. And honestly, I felt like vomiting. I was just so messed up. And then the warden says, well, I said, maybe I can come back and talk to Gregoire another day. And the warden's like, sure, absolutely. And then he says to one of the 5 prisoners, he says, this guy, who was a pastor, he was in prison for life for his role in the genocide, but he's also a pastor. And the warden says, maybe you'd pray for us before. I don't know if the warden I doubt he ends every visit with prayer, but maybe something he saw in my struggle, and I don't know what he read in Gregoire's demeanor, but this pastor who's in prison for genocide prays. And I'll confess too, that wasn't a nice thing. I didn't welcome that. I'm like, I'd rather that guy just shut up. Because, he said, when we asked, why'd you do it? He says, well, we were ordered to do it. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Fast forward to the evening. I have a Skype with Teresa. I could hardly talk to her. I was so busted up. I said, Teresa, she's all happy. And she's like, how was your day? And there's always something new in Rwanda, when you're there. And I said, Teresa, it was horrible today. I met the guy who killed Johnson's mother, the guy who was going to kill everybody at the orphanage. And I don't even want to tell you his name. He doesn't deserve to have a name. And there was a lot of quiet time. And Teresa's she's such a good listener. And she doesn't try to fix things. And she just says, that's got to be tough. I wish I was there, she says. And after these silences and this tears and everything else and saying, I don't know how I'm going to sleep, all of a sudden I remembered over the last 4 or 5 years, I had been kind of hammering out 5 truths about God that I would use to center myself when I got knocked flat, when I got like the wind knocked out of me. And so I go, Teresa, wait, I know what I got to do. And I started reciting these 5 truths to Teresa, over the Skype. There was no audio, no video, it's just audio. And by now the sun had set. I'm sitting on the cement floor, leaning against my room in the nice little guest rooms, leaning against my bed. And I said to her, number 1, God is always with me. And with that, I take a breath. Number 2, God takes great delight in me. That was a hard one for me to really begin to believe and write down, because I'm always focused on behavior. For years, I've got these pathways that God, his delight is connected to my behavior. But it's not true. God's delight is connected to the fact that I'm God's child. And I said, number 3, God's love calms my heart. And often it's music, but it can be stories. It can be nature and beauty and stuff. Make this habit of seeing God's love calming my heart. Number 4 is a little longer. Hey, God has everything I need for every situation. And together we're going to make it, even if I die. And then something clicked in my head before I said the last one, number 5. But I went ahead and I said, number 5, God's my shepherd. God's my redeemer. And I go, Teresa, you know what? These 5 things, if these 5 things are true, and I believe them with all my heart, they are true. But if they're true for me, they have to be true for everyone. And so I said, they got to be true for Gregoire. And I need to start taking myself out of the center of the circle and putting Gregoire in the center of the circle. And it was really easy on the first one, God is always with, and I could put Gregoire. That's kind of easy. You can say that about anybody, I think. The second one was not easy. Don't tell me God takes great delight in Gregoire, this man who led the killing. But that's old pathways talking. You see, and that's what gets in the way of forgiveness so many times for me. It's those old pathways that are talking, old pathways that are dictating, neural pathways I'm talking about. Sorry, maybe I'll get to that in a minute. Oh, I've already gone over time. Anyway, for the next year, I go on to, somebody told me you guys were Baptist and you wouldn't mind if I had time. Anyway, that was he said you have to be real careful with the Lutherans. But anyway, I went through for the next year, just substituting every time I thought about Gregoire, substituting his name in these 5 truths that I hold. Come back a year later, I'm feeling like I'm ready to meet Gregoire now, because I no longer just, I'm not just defining him as this mass murderer. And so I meet him at the prison. We go back in the same room where this thing had happened before. This encounter, had happened before. And as he comes in, as we both kind of walk in with another translator, I'd asked him, would you like to speak in French? And he said, no, I prefer translator. I mean, his French was better than my French, but anyway, maybe that's why he wanted a translator, my French. But anyway, just thought of that. We sit down and I said, Gregoire, last year when I was here, I was so angry. I didn't even want to shake your hand. I don't want to be angry. I want to apologize. And Gregoire then says to me through the translator, he says, I actually recognized you right away when I came in the room. I was happy to see that you were well, that you were alive. And these things are like hitting me like waves, massive waves in the ocean. He says, I've thought about you over the years. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. I've thought about him over the years, but one thing, I've only fired one thing, this mass murder. And this empathy that he seems to be, this compassion that he's happy to see that I'm alive. That was just, I had no pathways in my brain like that, especially not towards him. I don't think I even thought much of whether he was dead or alive, to be honest with you. But whenever I'd tell the story of the orphanage being surrounded, of course, I talked about Gregoire, the leader of the killing squad. This is one of the most important tools for me for many things, but especially for forgiveness, is I get stuck in one thing thinking with forgiveness. And the neuro people tell us, when we make these new pathways in our brain and we store information, the more we fire them, the more we're rewiring our brain. The coding on the outside of those little synapses, it's called myelin sheath. And the more you fire it, the stronger it gets, the quicker it gets. And so when I'm thinking about Gregoire, I'm just thinking about a mass murderer, the guy who killed Johnson's mother. I'm not thinking about him about anything other than the offense. And that kind of thinking breeds other firing of pathways of negativity about the person that I may be struggling with. So the big question is, how do I stop one thing thinking? And for me, the tool that helps me most effectively combat this one thing thinking is moving out of the center. Most of the time when I'm angry, when I'm hurt, when I'm confused, when I'm frustrated, if I stop and step back for a moment, I go, you're right in the center of this, Carl. Everything is from your perspective. But when you step out, when Jesus is, if you're bringing something to the altar and you got something to get, go forgive somebody else. You are in the center. When you have something against somebody, you are in the center. And in the kingdom of God, well, we can be in the center, but it's only in Christ that we should be in the center. And for me, I'm too often alone in the center, in my own frustration, anger, bitterness. And so I wanted to just share that with you this evening, and maybe just one other. I know I'm a couple minutes over. Let me just tell you. Well, I definitely better finish. We're in the. I'll bring back to his picture here. He tells me several other things. They had planned to kill me. He had quite an interesting story that he told me, but he said it wasn't God's will that they kill me, which was really interesting to hear from this man as well. But at the end, we stood up to shake hands. And I always tell people I should have seen it coming, because Rwandans are big huggers, but went right past the handshake to an embrace. Now, I don't tell this story in Rwanda, and I know we're being streamed tonight, and maybe there's some Rwandans who are listening to this. Part of me felt so guilty after I hugged that man, because I felt like I was betraying somehow the 2,000 people that he and his gang had killed. And yet, in the moment, it was the most liberating thing that I could have experienced at that time. This freedom from anger and bitterness. And yet I'm like, how can I tell my friend Johnson that I hugged the guy who killed his son? I struggled with that. It felt right. It felt liberating and free. And yet it seemed wrong that I was somehow disrespecting the people that were killed for about 9 months, until I finally, in my journal, let me just show you that here for a moment. Finally, in my journal, I started to write about this. And I said, there seems to be an unspoken law of life that says you have to stay angry and resentful about destructive actions, horrific injustices. If you let go of that anger or resentment, you somehow are minimizing or even condoning the action or the injustice. And in some way, you're letting the perpetrator off the hook. Now, when I wrote this in my journal, it was losing power, because when I didn't identify it, when that was subconsciously floating around there, it had power. But when I wrote it in my journal, I'm like, no, wait a minute. This is not true. Staying angry and resentful does not honor the people. And I started to think, what if that's the case, I'm letting this have the final word. This destructive act does not have the final say unless I let it have. This destructive act does not define the enduring legacy unless I give it that power. I can have the final say by finding a pathway to be free from anger and resentment. My actions of mercy and compassion and forgiveness can define the enduring legacy of that horrific act. I can take the power away from the perpetrator and stop the cycle of harm. And I then thought, what if I had been killed? And if my kids would have found a way to become free from anger and bitterness towards the guy who killed me, I would not be angry. I would be so grateful. I'd be like, yes, you have broken the power. You have stopped the cycle of violence. Oh man, we're supposed to have questions, and now I'm 9 minutes over. Pastor Grant, what are you going to do?
I'm going to ask you back tomorrow.
There's still a few
No,
people
nobody.
here. Not everybody's gone home.
No, we're still here. We're still here. I want to know one thing, and that is, from your perspective, do you still struggle with feeling like you betrayed Rwandans by forgiving this man?
Not at all. Not at all. And some really close Rwandan friends, I have shared this story with them, and I've spoken with them, and I've asked them for their honest reaction. And they so graciously have said, no, that is your journey. That is your choice. And I think we often confuse what is our, because we often say, yeah, forgiveness is very personal, but then we take on we start judging and deciding for other people. You should have, or how could they, and things like that. And we continue the cycle of anger and bitterness. But my Rwandan friend said, no, you should not at all. That is your pathway, and that is your choice. And honestly, they said, we like it. But that was their personal response then to it. And so not at all. Since I see it now as part of breaking the cycle of violence, which it is so crucial to, as stopping the power of the offender, which I believe it does. No, not at all. Not at all. But I am still cautious and wondering how to share that story in a place like Rwanda, where for many, the wounds are still so fresh. And I didn't lose my wife and children. I didn't watch my family be tortured or my daughter be raped. I didn't watch any of that. And so for the Rwandans themselves, this is a journey that I want to be super sensitive about.
Deal with, the lie that we're dealing with that we were talking about is that forgetting means forgiveness. And if I'm hearing you, forgiveness is in actuality, to get to a place of real forgiveness, you can't forget. I mean, that's what gives forgiveness its power, right?
No,
Is that what you're?
I think it's a transition from the malice, wishing harm or suffering. I was sledding with the neighbor kids the other day, and the older brother nailed his little sister with a snowball right in the face. And she was brave and she didn't cry, but when we got to the bottom of the hill, he was at the top, and she was like, let's get him. And I said, should we make him cry? And she says, yes, that natural feeling of wishing harm and malice. Forgiveness is a flipping that I wish good. I wish good. Now, Peter's thing, and we could talk a long time about this, but Peter's thing about how many times, I think part of that conversation would be boundaries. There's times when we need healthy boundaries and things. We don't just set ourselves up to be abused and taken advantage of. But I definitely believe that this idea of I am for forgiveness, I am in favor of good for you. And when that can change from I am in favor of harm for you, malice, to I am in favor of good for you, it's really so much about me and my mind, even if they don't ask for forgiveness. That can't be a prerequisite for forgiveness. Them asking forgiveness for me is so much about a journey for me and as a Christian, me and my Father, that journaling and those truths about God. But then there's other things that can come later, reconciliation, pardon, all those, but I keep them really separate. Forgiveness for me is the simple dictionary. I will no longer be angry or resentful towards somebody for a fault, a mistake, or an offense. So the question is, how do I get free of anger and resentment?
Give a little bit of time here in the room. There's a couple of things that you said that you couldn't hear, but the room kind of gasped. The room kind of took a breath. And I was wondering if you could put back up on the screen real quick those 5 truths that you talked about that center you. Could you do that?
Absolutely. I want to put them too with Gregoire's name in there. I can't tell you how many times. I mean, most all of us know what it's like to have the wind knocked out of us. And I can't tell you how many times I have recited these things, or I simply, if I'm somewhere, even though I have them memorized and I'm by my keyboard, I will write them out because I know different things happen as I'm typing each one of the words. And as I was preparing for this evening, and it was my first time to list them like this, and even choosing colors that I was putting in there, I was strengthening, I was firing these pathways in my mind. That myelin sheath, I know I'm a little geeky here about the neural pathways, but it just gives me such a concrete way to understand that I have power. When God gives me choice, I have power of the pathways I fire or the pathways I choose not to fire. And so, these are, it was just fun this evening. And even now, as I wrote in Gregoire's name here in preparation, there wasn't a hint. Now, it's not like I'm free from all anger, okay? Because I wish it was like that. from that room where Gregory and I embraced and we stepped back and he's grabbing his short sleeve of the uniform and drying his eye. And this guy is not an expressive guy. He doesn't seem like somebody who's had a conversion experience in prison or anything, and I'm drying my eyes. We go in the next room with a group of teachers and he starts telling them that I'm a hero. And you know what my first response was? It was anger right away. Right after I had just hugged this guy and felt free and stuff, but there was still, I didn't want him talking about me. I still had pathways in my brain. That's why forgiveness is such a journey. It's so complex, and anger and bitterness weaves itself into so many places in our mind that I found myself just praying, God, please help me see where else this is tangled up in my brain. And now I'm not angry to think about him talking or calling me a hero. I know that might sound silly as I say that to you, but there's so much about anger and bitterness that is not logical, is not rational, but that does not mean it doesn't have power over me. And so once again, I had to journal to work through, why did it make you angry when he called you a hero? So yeah, it's this on. I don't know where I'd be without journaling, without professional counseling, and without my wife and a wonderful support group of my brothers and friends. And I'm happy to hear, we're new best friends, Grant.
Man, when I called you a hero, did you? I mean, I'm good with you, right?
That whole hero thing is a whole nother conversation, okay? Because it's the problem is pedestals and things, and we won't go there right now. But no, I don't. It's just I didn't want that man. I didn't want him saying anything. I wanted to contain him, and forgiveness helps us to cut the bonds not only loose from our own heart and our own way of seeing, but the bonds around the person that we are angry at are set free. I don't think I said it in this 20-minute video, the one I was referring to earlier this evening. If you want to watch that, and you'll learn about Maria and Filbert. But Maria, at the end of our conversation, I don't know if I said it in the video or not, but Maria puts her hand, because Filbert was in the group who killed, I'm so sorry, I'm blocking him. Filbert was in the group who killed Maria's husband and sons. And Maria puts her hand on Filbert's shoulder at the end, and she says, it's wonderful to be part of making somebody beautiful again. And Filbert is beautiful. I gotta give you the picture of Maria and Filbert. And so this whole idea of setting ourselves free, of unleashing of the, sorry, here she is. Here's Maria and Filbert. Yeah, anyway, I hope you'll check out that story on YouTube.